I'm going to spend a few minutes to talk about SPP, but before I do, it's hard for me to believe that it was a couple years ago that my chief operating officer, Carl Monroe, was at your meeting in Jackson talking about the benefits of markets. And we've had some success in that regard in the last year or so, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But appreciate the opportunity to be here. I have a quick outline. I've got a lot of pictures. I'll hopefully keep you all awake. I realize I'm standing between you guys and reception, so if you want questions and dialogue, we can go as long as you want, but we can cut this down a little bit too if you want. So let me talk about what we're doing at SPP, Southwest Power Pool, who we are, first of all, for those that may not know, and then talk about our planning process, how much transmission that we've actually got built and are building in SPP. It's pretty phenomenal, actually, if you look back on it, compared to where we were 25 years ago. I want to talk about our footprint expansion to the north to include the WAPA Basin integrated system, which is very exciting. That'll happen this fall. Then I want to talk mostly about benefits of diversity and footprint expansion. And I need to be blunt here. I'm an optimist. I'm a dreamer sometimes, but I think it's better for us to kind of create our own future than to just sit back and react to whatever is foisted upon us. So I'm an engineer too, so I'd like to solve problems, and I want to solve big problems if I can. And I'd like to help you help me do that, okay? So let's go through some slides and show you who SPP is. First of all, we've been around since World War II. We started as a result of the need for utilities in the Middle South to pool resources to support the war effort. No single utility could meet the demands of an aluminum smelter in the Little Rock, Arkansas area, so everybody got together. 13 utilities, they started pooling resources, building transmission, and we really became a regional reliability council in 1968 after the New York City blackouts in the mid-60s. So this is our reliability footprint, and we have multiple footprints, which is a little bit confusing. But the key thing about this slide is we're in the southwest corner of the Eastern Interconnection. And the Eastern Interconnection has been called the world's biggest machine. Each of those grids there, and I'll forget Quebec, for example, but right now, but the U.S. grids all operate at 60 hertz. They have asynchronous ties between the grids, where they convert the AC power on one side to DC power and then back to AC power. And that's how they regulate the interconnections between the grids. SPP actually ties together the grids today. We have the only 2 DC ties into the ERCOT market to the south, and we have 3 DC ties to the west today as we speak. See if I can make this go forward. Here we go. This is a map that shows organized markets in the U.S. and Canada. This is a map of the ISO RTO Council member representatives. SPP is a little bigger in this map because Nebraska is part of our market. They aren't necessarily under our reliability responsibilities. But that's a little bit interesting too, because we do a lot of studies to make sure we keep the lights on in Nebraska. But in terms of the actual compliance effort and auditing their efforts to do standards and studies, that's not under Southwest Power Pool, Inc. So this shows that SPP is, we're up against the Mid-Continent ISO to the north and the east, and basically to the west, there's no real markets in the eastern edge of the western grid right now. This is our footprint. The big thing about this slide is, if you looked at this slide last year and you look at what's changed, it's the 345 kV miles. We've built a lot of transmission in, and I'll use this pointer here to show you, in the central and south plains of the U.S., we've built a lot of transmission in the last year. About 1,400, 1,500 miles of very high capacity 345 kV lines, especially compared to historical standards. To integrate a lot of renewables from the western part of SPP into the load centers in central and eastern SPP. Primarily, we're using those wires also for exports, primarily to markets east. There's renewables being shipped off east. You heard the gentleman, Carl, from Southern Company talk about that this morning. They're actually buying wind power out of Kansas and Oklahoma as we speak right now. So that's our system. It's a pretty big system. Not a lot of load, okay? A lot of geography here. a lot of diversity. You've seen this map before. This is an overlay of the wind profile map from NREL at 80-meter hub heights that shows you the quality of the wind resources in the classic SPP footprint. But it's not just wind, it's also solar that I'd like to talk about too. One of the key things about wind is making sure you have good forecast of wind. And there's been a lot of advancements lately to improve weather forecast and wind power forecasting. This is actual data from the recent polar vortex we had in early January of this year. Weather got very cold in the south central states. We actually exceeded our 35,000 megawatt peak demand by a couple gigawatts. And you'll see the wind farms actually contributed quite a bit to our capacity requirements during those peak conditions, which is not something that we count upon, but something that's very nice to see. I think you've seen that in the last couple polar vortexes, is that the wind farms really contributed to the peak demand and reserve obligations at the time of peaks. That's a good story to tell. This shows the $8 or $9 billion worth of transmission projects that we've built in Southwest Power Pool over the last few years. We started doing regional planning in 2004, and since that time we've built a lot of transmission and we're building a lot more. When I started with SPP, we had a $4 billion rate base for transmission. We're going up to about a $12 billion rate base with all of these projects. And we're getting some pressure. People are seeing their transmission costs going up and up and up, and they're not seeing the benefits. It just takes time to get benefits from very long life assets like transmission infrastructure. But we are seeing it. It's just not enough that people are recognizing it. So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit quickly is load additions. And we are experiencing significant load growth from oil and gas development in the Permian Basin, expanding west into West Texas and into eastern New Mexico. If you see in this map, we did a special study last year, and my group did it. We're special studies as part of our job. But this is a high priority incremental load study. We were trying to look at new loads that were forecasted to be on our system. This is a 50-50 forecast. This is not a real optimistic forecast. This is a best guess, expected load additions. But we were seeing about 800-900 megawatts of new load being added at the tail end of our system. That's the good news and the bad news. The good news, it's the tail end of our system and there's no transmission there. That's the bad news if you're trying to serve load. There's no transmission there, so you have to basically start with a blank piece of paper. And that's a nice thing to do, rather than try to integrate a bunch of older, smaller wires into an existing or planned system. So we had this transmission expansion that went along with these load additions. I want to focus on the Permian Basin. And this is a significant 345 kV line that's being extended down into the Hobbs and Carlsbad, New Mexico area as we speak. We just approved this project. It's about $250 million just for the backbone line to come in from the Lubbock area. But the exciting thing is not that we're going to serve a whole bunch of new loads for oil production and gas processing and things like that. In my mind, that's one of the benefits. The other benefit is if you take and overlay that transmission build out on the solar radiation maps of the U.S., so you can see that the best solar resources in the whole eastern grid are in this corner of Southwest Power Pool. And the good news is that's where we're building the big transmission line. So we're expecting to harvest some of the best renewables, the solar resources, using the same wires that we're extending down there to serve load. We'll backhaul on the wires to get solar resources to markets east, okay? And I'd like to see it help complement our renewable expansion that's underway, which is primarily wind. Right now we have about 9,200 megawatts of wind on our wires. There's another couple thousand coming. And I think the solar and the wind will complement each other very nicely if you start looking at the profiles. This is what I'm really excited about, and one of the reasons I asked Lloyd to be involved with this. The Western Area Power Administration, the Upper Great Plains, is in the process of joining Southwest Power Pool. And they will be part of our footprint this fall. So I've been going to places like Billings, Montana and Bismarck, North Dakota to help them understand what we do and how they need to support our processes, and we need to understand their loads and their systems. So the Upper Great Plains, the integrated system, is primarily 115 kV and 345 kV system in Dakotas. with some transmission into the Montana areas as well as western Minnesota and western Iowa. So that's the transmission facilities that will be coming underneath our tariff this fall. So when you add these maps together, you can see that we've got quite a swath of the center of the U.S. That'll be the footprint for Southwest Power Pool starting this fall. The thing that really excites me about this is if you looked at the existing DC ties, that in the first map I showed you the 3 grids, we have the DC ties into ERCOT, an east tie and the north tie. We have these 3 DC ties that we manage today. These are a couple more DC ties that Rocky Mountain Power manages and Tri-State does, and Basin and WAPA manage these ties. So SPP effectively becomes the seam of the U.S. grids. There is one additional tie up in Saskatchewan, but it's electrically very far removed from the majority of the transmission and the resources in North America. So to me, that's a really interesting and promising proposition, is to rethink those DC ties and maybe even move that seam over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But we got to talk about this and study this and understand it and see if it's even doable first. So, and that's something I'm really excited about. So this is the map that I showed earlier with the renewable resources in the classic SPP. If you overlay that with the WAPA Basin IS, you can see that we've got a lot of world-class wind. Nothing like Wyoming, but right behind it. And the interesting thing to me is, and I think Dr. Naughton has done some studies to show that the wind in Wyoming and the wind in Nebraska complement each other. To me, that's a really positive thing. And we need to find a way to work together to the benefit of both entities and both states and both systems. So I'm excited about this. So where are we at? I told you we had 9.2 gigawatts. We actually just set a brand new peak this week in terms of the actual contribution. It was over 8,300 megawatts of instantaneous contribution toward demand. At the time, it was about a third of our total requirements on our system. We've got another 5 gigawatts of wind in the queue with 2,000 megawatts of solar that just showed up all of a sudden. And hopefully that's being driven by that H-Pills transmission line that's going into New Mexico. We got 2 to 3 gigawatts of wind that's actually being built as we speak, some solar being added. And then we got another 12,000 that's already got signed interconnection agreements and is just waiting. So there's a lot of pinned up demand for renewables in SPP today, more than we could use. And the data that I've shown you does not include any of the wind that's in the WAPA Upper Great Plains system, okay? That'd be another 1,000 megawatts existing wind. And the cool thing about that, it's going to be a diverse kind of wind compared to the wind in the South Plains. Just like their hydro resources are diverse, their load is winter peaking, we're summer peaking. There's going to be huge benefits of creating a bigger footprint from SPP up north to the Canadian border. Very, very excited about that. This shows the wind farms that are in service, what's been installed in the fourth quarter of last year, as well as what's projected to be installed this year. This is EIA data. But you can see tremendous wind development in the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas, and some in Kansas. A lot of wind being built up in the Iowa region even. But I think the potential for a lot of wind is right here in the upper Midwest, and you've seen that. You've seen that. And I'm excited about what this map will look like in 5 years. So I think it'll be colored in all the way up to the Canadian border and west to the mountains, especially with the Clean Power Plan. So this is the approved transmission projects in SPP, and you may be surprised, but SPP has already approved major transmission projects up to the Bakken, as well as a major project to serve the Keystone XL pipeline loads. These are actually Basin Electric WAPA loads that are being added to our system this fall officially, but we've gone ahead and done a study that said these projects should qualify for socialized cost recovery across the footprint based on our criteria. So we're excited about that. We're missing, there's an opportunity here, okay? I really think there's a huge opportunity right in here to create some transmission. I put on this map the Trans-West projects, as well as Gateway South and the High Plains Express and some other transmission, as well as some MISO projects that are being built. But I think there's a huge opportunity right here for us to look long term about tying our systems together. And that's a hard thing to do, because typically the engineers the models that we have just stop at the DC ties. The WECC models stop on the eastern edge at the DC ties. SPP models stop at the DC ties going west. We need to pull those models together, in my opinion, and see if there's really some opportunities long term. Some recent developments, everybody wants to export power, right? Everybody wants to export wind. And I think the first one's pretty exciting. Nebraska is moving forward and trying to export. We've got capacity being built to export 2 gigawatts east out of their system. We haven't yet looked at what we could do going west to Wyoming and what Wyoming could do coming east into Nebraska. I'd like to do that, okay? And the other thing we've got going on are some interesting things that are challenges for engineers. Golden Spread Electric Co-op, and there are some other generators that are on the edge of the seams today as we speak that are actually grid switchers. They go from one market to the other. Golden Spread Electric Co-op is adding 600 to 800 megawatts of new grid switchers around the Lubbock area to go between the SPP market and the ERCOT markets. That creates a challenge for planning, but it's also an opportunity for those units and also help the markets too, because they'll inject those resources into the markets that make the most money and create the most efficiency overall. So flexibility is a good thing. One of the things I'm excited about is WestConnect's done some studies looking at DC ties between Colorado and Kansas, and that was not something that SPP started. That was something coming from folks that go to WestConnect, the regional planning group meetings. I think there's similar opportunities between Wyoming and Nebraska. We've kind of talked about those. The other thing that I'm really excited about, our Economic Studies Working Group, which is the people that do our economic studies at Southwest Power Pool, they've actually created a scenario that they want to look at, which they've called WECC connectivity. I don't know what that means, but the fact that they even brought up WECC in part of a modeling exercise and a scope study is just great to me, because we're looking beyond the traditional borders and looking at what we could do long term. I don't want to spend a lot of time on a couple of these slides, but one of the things that we're doing at SPP is we've spent a lot of money to build a robust grid, okay? And we're continuing to spend that. One of the latest things our board has told us to do, we've changed our strategic plan, and our goal now is to optimize the existing grid and get the most out of the existing grid. And I think that's going to require collaboration. It's going to require technologies like synchrophasers, which I think are just really exciting things. If you're an engineer and you want to know what's really going on in the grid, you can go look at some synchrophasers and get data at 30 cycles per second and know really how the machines are performing and what's going on between the systems and how the system is separating or getting stronger or weaker at major nodes. I just got one concluding slide. We've implemented a marketplace at SPP over the years. In 2007, we started with an energy imbalance market. I'd encourage you guys and others to think about that, and I know we're working with folks in the West to do that with SPP, potentially even running that market out of Little Rock. The last two bullets are really important to me. These environmental regulations, these clean power plan things are game changers. And we need to look at these as opportunities to change the grid, in my opinion, and how we want this grid to perform 20, 30, 40 years out. And we can do that. And the DOE could actually fund a national grid study. They did one back in 1980, and they did another one in 2000. I think now they need to do one in 2016 or 17 that's real and something that we can actually use to inform decisions and really shape the grid of the future. With that, I'd welcome any questions or comments, but I appreciate your attention.
Question from the board, please.
Are you going to be at the reception?
Yes, sir. I'd love to.
I'll save my question for then.
I'll see you then. Thanks.
Thanks. I had a couple. I was thinking go ahead and do that study to take wind from Wyoming and head it east, if you needed authorization. No, I had a couple questions. I know you didn't talk about it, but I read it quickly in some of your last bullets there about dynamic line rating. Can you talk real quickly, what kind of benefits could we get? Could we get more capacity over existing transmission lines if we were to deploy such a technology?
I think so, yeah. I think you've seen studies that show you get 10 to 15% pretty regularly using dynamic ratings. You know, typically engineers use static ratings, 4 feet per second wind speeds, which is pretty conservative, especially around here. When that's below the cut-in speed for the wind turbines, right? So I think, but there's also a risk, okay? 99% of the time, the rating's probably higher. But 1% of the time, the wind may not be blowing at all, and you may actually have to derate your capacity on that wire, okay? But I think we can manage that, and I think there's a lot of upside with things like dynamic line ratings or topology control or ways to use the grid we have just smarter and maybe just a little different, rather than just keep this thing static and the parameters static in our models. Really use information that's available about wind speed or ambient conditions or whatever's going on within the system. What load's at risk. I mean, can we do things to push this system farther without getting into system insecurity and brownouts and things like that, but to manage the risk and to use the capacity that's out there in the system. And I think dynamic line ratings are a great thing to look into.
I'd like to hear. And one other comment, I think from the panels already early today and some of the discussions, that in a lot of your service territory, that's where quite a few of the projected coal retirement plants will retire. So you're going to experience probably more loss of existing generation. So would that open up more of a market pull for, say, Wyoming wind?
It could. It could. Right now, our members are forecasting 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts of coal retirements. There's significant retrofits and fuel switching that they're even projecting, mostly in response to MATS and regional haze, and not necessarily for the Clean Power Plan yet. But yeah, there could be markets east for base load units and energy, not just renewable diversity exchanges. Yes, good questions.
And we have done a lot of work with Nebraska over the last couple of years. It's true that our wind correlates well with their wind. And so when you get ready for 2 gigawatts of wind, I think Nebraska would be more than willing to share one each. And even better, we could even give you a wind-gas hybrid system that is dispatchable or close to dispatchable, so you won't even have to mess with the variability of it. So
that would be very nice.
Well,
I'd love to study that.
It would be very nice for us too. So
one of the things to keep in mind, back in the 60s, when we built the 500 kV grid in the southeast U.S., that was in response to diversity exchange between adjacent systems. Okay, the Tennessee Valley Authority was a winter peaking, high nuclear-based system. They wanted to sell power in the summer to their neighbors who were summer peaking utilities who had excess capacity in the winter. I think we could do the same thing, maybe on a very shorter temporal scale, with diversity exchanges to help each other with renewable developments and things like that. But we need to study it. But that backbone 500 kV grid that we built back in the 60s has paid for itself time and time again. And it's hard to quantify the benefits of robust transmission. It really is. We don't even think about what could happen, what should happen, what will happen.
you've been a good friend and a good friend to Wyoming. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Let's give Jay a hand, please.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? We got one.
Because I like Dale's presentations when he comes, so I'm still a big believer in what he's saying. I think we look at long term, but for the purposes of Wyoming, when this Upper Great Plains is going to join, what does that take? The legislature, the governor, So can we get something from the Infrastructure Authority that says what we need to do? Because our legislature, it's too late for this legislature, probably the next, to say, here's the steps to take to join the SPP or to looking east, because I'm a big believer in California doesn't want our energy. We should look to the east, which is a much larger, I'm convinced that it's a much larger market, not just for our wind, but for California doesn't want our coal energy, and then look to the east as well. I think that, but what's the process to get to that point where they're joining up?
I think it would take several studies, and there'd have to be lots of meetings amongst policymakers and regulators, and I'm all for making that happen. We're pretty good at evolutionary and incremental growth. We were very excited when WAPA, Basin, and Heartland, the integrated system, were looking at markets, and they decided to join SPP rather than other options. And stand alone and create their own market's always one option. So we'd gladly support whatever you need. I think just getting the engineers together to think strategically about what we could do, and then maybe showing what the potential benefits could be, would maybe compelling enough to start that dialogue in earnest. But it'll take some time. But I think we need to do it sooner than later, start it.
Any other questions? And by the way, Jay, Dr. Naughton is with us too. John, raise your hand.
Great to see you.
And John did a good bit of analysis
Yes.
in that geographic diversity, comparing Wyoming to Nebraska.
Yep.
So we're ready to talk about that when you are. Let's give Jay another hand,
Thank you.
please.
Thank you, sir.